Hello? Is anyone out there? Right. I've got a small screen in front of me that tells me that it is 10:30. You're certainly quoted. Any apologies, Joyce? Okay. Any more from members here? Right. Can we move on to item 2, appointment of chairperson for this meeting, please? Thank you, Councillor McKee.
Right, can I wish you all Happy New Year before we start? Councillor Gilroy, you've got an issue to raise?
No, it's just under apologies. I was expecting Councillor McGregor to be here, but she's just sent an email to say she's been detained, so she can't be here. If you could put in her apologies, please. Thank you, and Happy New Year.
I thought you'd be in Africa this year. Or you back early, you get kicked out. Have we any declarations of interest? No, thank you. Can we move to item 4, Civic Government Scotland Act 1982, review of taxi and private hire licensing. Mr. Taylor, do you want to introduce this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The panel has a remit to make recommendations in respect of reviewing taxi and private hire licensing and other forms of civic government licensing. The panel as a whole has decided that the full panel will be dealing with the review of taxi and private hire licensing. There's a fairly detailed report before you going through the background. I would just highlight certain issues that, along with regulation of the taxi and private hire trade, I think you've really got to also consider recognition of the valuable work that they do, and that it does form an integral element of the local transport infrastructure. Mention is made of the Scottish Government consultation taxi and private hire licensing, to which the panel provided a response on behalf of Dumfries and Galloway Council. And as stated, there is a detailed summary of the consultation responses. There were 68 responses, I believe. But there is no detailed programme taking this forward by the Scottish Government. Within the Scottish Government's programme for Scotland 2013-2014, a proposal is put forward that there will be a licensing bill introduced into the Scottish Parliament, and one of the proposals within that bill will be to make changes to taxi and private hire car licensing to protect the public and legitimate trade. Now, although it relates to England and Wales, I think it is still important to have a look at the Law Commission taxi and private hire review, which was almost immediately before the Scottish Government one, and also look at the scale of it. Now, the Law Commission have issued an interim statement, and when they talk about consultation, they say the consultation attracted over 3,000 written responses from a wide range of stakeholders, including taxi drivers, private hire operators, licensing operators, disability groups, specialist consultants, trade unions and the police. The Commission attended consultation meetings and events over a period of 4 months. We attended 84 meetings across England and Wales, many of which attracted large-scale attendance, including conferences and meetings organised by taxi associations and trade unions representing taxi drivers, the Institute of Licensing and the National Association of Licensing and Enforcement Officers. It goes on to say that Private Hire and Taxi Monthly magazine undertook a significant survey based on our provisional proposals, with over 800 responses. Now, one of the provisional proposals, and in fact it almost appeared like a conclusion, was to recommend that quantity controls of taxis should be withdrawn. And within this interim statement, paragraph 6, we no longer recommend abolishing quantity controls. We initially proposed the local authorities should lose the ability to limit the number of taxis licensed in their area on the basis of economic theory, whereby the market could be left to determine the appropriate number of vehicles. The weight of evidence received during consultation and further comparative research have led us to change this key recommendation in order to allow licensing authorities to limit taxi numbers should they wish to do so. Now, previous to this, it has always been the recommendation that the limit of taxi numbers in England and Wales should be withdrawn. And now there seems to be a vote face on that and a change of knowledge and a change of understanding of it. And I think that that could certainly pass across the border into Scotland as well. It's no longer, it'll probably no longer an issue of sort of uncertainty. If this comes through as a proper recommendation within a bill in England and Wales, it will strengthen the position of that in Scotland as well. But to go back to the report, there are specific issues which are raised within the report which might be dealt with by recommendations to the wider authority, and that includes the Council's transport strategy and also the in relation to taxi ranks and as part of the Council's equality outcomes in relation to taxi and private hire licensing. One other issue which is raised within the same paragraph at 3.3.3 is the question of communication with the trade, and maybe these are all issues which could be dealt with by the next ensuing meeting of this panel. I think that's all I've got to say in respect of the report, but the appendix is a draft action plan which has been prepared by officers, including recommended principles. Now, this is recommended if adopted, or if adopted as amended. It is not set in stone. It's an ongoing document.
Well, I think we all know we're sitting in recent application licensing. I think there's a number of issues been raised just recently that's caused us concern. So now is the chance to address these things and see how we want to contain them within our regulations. Anybody want to comment first? Councillor Geddes.
Thanks very much indeed, sir. Interested to hear Mr Taylor's comments about sort of those south of the border apparently having something of a road to Damascus, as it were, and saying that licensing authorities can restrict numbers. For the record, I happen to agree with that. In the restricting of the numbers, of course, I think we're perfectly entitled as a licensing authority in the Dumfries and Galloway context to endeavour to do what we need to do to drive standards up. And if you're doing that, Chair, it seems to me that the people who are being subjected to that process are entitled to expect that they have the ability to make a reasonable standard of living as part of the deal. And therefore, my argument would be that's valid, and certainly in the Dumfries context. But 3.3.2 of the report, sir, says that should a sense of civic pride in the fleet be an aspiration, and I would say that unequivocally that should in fact definitely be the case. I think at this moment in time, you know, you hear comments from various clients, etc., constituents perhaps is a better word. Things are not necessarily always as they might have expected, and as I say, I think as a licensing authority, if we can drive, assist in driving standards up, and we need the full cooperation from the trade to do so, to me that becomes a legitimate outcome, and we all finish up with a sense of civic pride in our taxi fleet, which operates the length and breadth of the region. And I think that should be one of the founding principles of what we're trying to do, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else want to comment? Councillor Hislop.
Chair, I think the point that Mr Taylor brought up with regard to the limiting the number of taxis is something that I agree with as well. However, one of the biggest issues we have when it comes to actual panels is the trade in licences, and that seems to be the case that somebody might have been sitting on the list waiting for a licence for 20 years, but if they've never been in the trade and don't know what's moving, number 45 comes along who's worked for somebody and gets the first licence. It could be that if you've got a big enough company, you could actually start to monopolise that situation and buy up all the licences. That would cause me concern, and I think we need to look at that practice as a council as to how we actually allocate those licences. And it may be that we need to change that practice as if you've got a business in the future, that licence is actually a licence for a taxi cab. It's not part of your business. I think that's something that we might need to consider.
I think I've got concerns along these lines as well, that there's maybe some people are getting too many licences and controlling what goes on. But I think there's also another issue with private hire vehicles, where we've no control over a number of these, and it's whether we could have any control over them. Have you got any idea on that, Mr. Taylor?
Well, that was actually one of the proposals within the Scottish Government's review document, and that may be within the licensing bill. We'll just have to see. But certainly that was something that they were discussing, was have a parity between taxis and private hire and give the local authority the power to decide whether or not to limit the numbers of private hires.
Given what Councillor Hislop said, I'll get you in a second, Councillor Thompson, what Councillor Hislop said about an individual or a group of individuals holding a number of licences and hand one in, but they've, for some reason, they've got the right to get, they've got first chance of it when it comes back, and anybody on the list is staying on the list, sort of thing. They didn't seem to achieve anything, even if they're number one, getting his body's housing allocation, I think. Have you any views on how we could address that?
I would say that yes, it is an issue, but I don't think you should be making policy on the hoof. You know, you're in a review process, and part of that review will be taking the views of the trade, of statutory agencies, of the public, and whatever other officers. So yes, it's an issue, but I don't think you should be discussing it at the level here of coming towards any sort of conclusion. Yes, it's been raised as an issue. It has been raised as an issue within the individual panels before, and it can be discussed, and it could be consulted upon, and a recommendation made later on within the review. Chair.
I think we recognise there's a process, but the issue has been raised, and I think it needs to be addressed. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Just on a point of clarity, are we actually able to restrict the number of private hire licences?
At the moment, no. It's restricted totally to taxis, and it's up to the local authority to decide that there's no unmet demand. But within the document, within the taxi and private hire licensing proposals for change, that was one of the proposals for change. and the Scottish Government have consulted upon that, and then there's going to be a licensing bill within the next session of the Scottish Parliament. But I don't know what that bill is going to contain in respect of taxing private hire. It leaves it pretty vague within the programme.
Come back in, Councillor Thompson. Okay. Councillor McCochtry.
Thanks, Chairman. I think in the appendix it goes on about the zoning for taxes only, and the first bullet point was a review of Dumfries taxi zone, and underneath that, so exploring the feasibility of other zones. And I think if you go back to the point Ivor was making about certain operators having too many licences, it's not just within the Dumfries zone you've got a problem. You've got operators who may well have quite a monopoly across the entire region. So I think you've got to look at the two things in context, that the Dumfries zone, and then look at the other areas, because you'll find areas that we don't have zoned. Some taxi operators will have X number of licences within the Dumfries zone, but they'll also hold licences in Castle Douglas, Stranraer, Newton Stewart. So I think you've got to look at the global picture as well as the local picture in making that determination. And I think the other thing that shouldn't be forgotten about, in the main, the licensed taxis tend to be more modern vehicles, up to date, nice and clean. The drivers also tend to be employees of the company, which means they're subjected to all the protection of minimum wage and health and safety at work, etc. The trouble with the private hire is they tend to be self-employed, and if they're using their own vehicle, they tend to be the older vehicles anyway, the ones that, I'm not saying less roadworthy, but they don't tend to be as up-to-date as the plated taxis. Another problem is, because they're self-employed, then they may well have another job as well, and these are the ones who probably work in the excessive hours, and they're probably very lucky in some instances, particularly through the week, if they're earning a couple of pounds an hour. So we've got to look at that economic argument as well, and that's another reason for limiting it, to make sure that the folk who are employed within the trade are making a decent living, rather than being exploited by one or two unscrupulous owners.
Councillor Geddes.
Thanks, Chair. My view is that, and again, I'm not sort of trying to preempt future detailed discussion that we'll need to have, or to try to make policy in the hoof, to use Mr Taylor's phrase, but my view is that we should be applying or seeking to apply the same principles, sir, to private hire cars as to taxis, and that they should come within, as I say, the aspiration of instilling a sense of civic pride in our fleet. And I think some of this, certainly some of the points that Tom has just made, as far as I'm concerned, certainly would resonate with me. So that's an issue that I would want to see definitely flagged up. I appreciate the current legislative situation, but at the end of the day, I would like to think that we can focus on that as part of our wider, our wider remit. And if need be, we should not be flinching or hesitating from making the appropriate representation to the Scottish Government to say, in fact, that private hired cars should have the same set of stringent conditions applied to them, with a view to driving or working with the trade to enhance and better the standards.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I don't think we've got the same influence over private hire, and they're getting away with things that taxi drivers wouldn't. And that's
Sorry, Chair.
Mr Taylor.
What I would say is that in respect of specification of vehicles, that's something that the panel could look into. Size of engine, the possibility of having an age limit. But I don't think it's fair to say that there's a massive distinction between private hire and taxis in respect of specification and road safety. All vehicles are tested on a 6-monthly basis. All private hire are tested on a 6-monthly basis, and if they fail, the plate's taken off. So they can't be used, and then when the vehicle is brought back, if it passes, the plate's put back on again. If it fails again, which would be very unlikely anyway, because most vehicles are passing first time. But I don't think there is this massive distinction between private hire. You have control over private hire. You don't have control over private hire to the extent of saying that there's a limit on it. But you have control over private hire to make sure that those vehicles are safe and are suitable to be private hire vehicles.
One of the concerns that taxi drivers have is the private hire picking up passengers off the street, which is, as we know, is something that shouldn't be happening. I mean, that is quite a concern for the taxi drivers that we have in the Dumfries area. You know, and the prices that these people are charging, taking places like Heath Hall, Locker Briggs, and going out, taking young people out and charging, I mean, 20 and 30 pounds to deliver them home. I mean, a lot of people have complained about that. I don't think they've complained to the right places yet, but you know, it's something that we're hearing.
So the question of private hire being used as a taxi by being hailed in the street or whatever is an enforcement issue. So you'd want to hear from the Chief Constable's representatives on that. But as I say, yes, you're raising issues which are within the action plan within the report. The question of enforcement, yes, okay, you introduce a high level of regulation if necessary. How's that going to be enforced? Yeah, so I'd suggest that you'd want to hear from the Chief Inspector Thompson.
We've got Councillor McComb, and then we'll bring the police in, if you don't mind. Okay, Councillor McComb.
Thanks, Chair. I'm pleased to see that one of the areas for review identified there is driver knowledge, because undoubtedly that is featured in several of the recent applications. That is quite an important factor to consider.
Thank you. Chief Inspector. Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Hislop.
Chair, it's with regard to the expert reference group. Does Mr Taylor feel that there's sufficient in there so that users of the service will have an input into the review as well? You know, we've got the diversity working group, but would that include a young person? You know, we have, what was it called? Inspectorate used to be something that the young people did. Could they be involved in that so that they could give the young person's view of it? You know, Councillor Room brought up about being charged too much for going home. It might be something that they could then give a input into the review as well.
Take that into consideration, Mr Taylor. There's also an issue mentioned in the papers about disability access, and I used to sit in the access panel, and as they stated there, wheelchair accessible vehicles not necessarily suitable for all disabled access, so that needs to be reviewed and proposals obviously brought forward as to what's the best way. But I notice also that there's one area where they reviewed and they come up with about 20 different types of vehicles, so that's not really a realistic expectation either. Councillor McCoftry?
I think we went through this a number of years ago, and the trouble is, because you get so many operators, then they'll sort of say, well, why should I have to go to the expense of getting a specialist vehicle? Because the ones that are wheelchair friendly are far, far more expensive than buying a conventional motor car. In fairness, one or two operators have taken it upon themselves. There's one guy who had the converted Volkswagen vehicle, wheels within wheels, they called it, because that way you could get the wheels of the wheelchair into the back of this vehicle. But he was unfortunate that if he didn't have a wheelchair passenger, it was totally unsuitable for people who were, it was okay if you're fit because it was a high vehicle in terms of access for for somebody out with a wheelchair. But for somebody who is maybe elderly and a bit frail, they couldn't get into that vehicle. So it is a wee bit of difficulty that if you make the vehicle too specialised, then can somebody make a living out of having that one vehicle? So again, I don't know whether, again, going back to the big operators, you maybe say to them, right, because you've got so many licences, we expect 1 in 5 vehicles to be friendly, and that's the price they pay for getting their monopoly, if you like. But it would be a difficult, if you're talking to the one-man operator and the guy's operating 30 vehicles, you can hardly force the one-man operator to go for a specialist vehicle and leave the big boy alone. So we've got to take a look at these kind of areas as well, I think.
Anybody else want to comment? Oh, sorry, Councillor Syme, sorry.
Oh, you're all right. No? Under 3.4, training of drivers, as everybody here knows, we do use a lot of vehicles for transporting children to school. Quite often in a fostering situation, a lot of accommodated children have to travel to schools because they're in a new area and they have to go to different schools and whatever. I'm not sure where we are with this, but I would just like to be sure that we look at training for this, because I know up to, when I was a foster care, up to a certain age, a company that took on the contract had also to provide an escort for children up to a certain age. And quite often I was a wee bit annoyed because I would see drivers with a wee lassie beside them in the front seat. And I think we need to look at this so that these companies know what the responsibilities are in transporting these children. And we are corporate parents. It's also safety for the drivers themselves, so that they're free allegations and don't come into that situation. But I know a lot of these companies that they took a contract on, but then it's really difficult and costly to provide escorts every morning at 8 o'clock in the morning to take a child to school. So I would just like to make sure that we know where we are with this, and that the people that are transporting these children know where they are as well. Because I have seen occasions where these rules have been breached.
Yeah, I think training of drivers and a dress code for drivers as well is quite important. It's something that we should address. Councillor Thompson?
Thank you, Chair. Again, it's a question, you know, are we entitled to impose residency qualifications on anyone we give a licence to?
I would suggest not. I don't think it would be strictly within the grounds for refusal.
Is that the case in other local authorities?
Well, the Civic Government Act is enforced across Scotland, so I would have thought yes, that would be the case.
I mean, I do have actually some concerns of that, having sat on a number of licensing panels recently where we've had people from way outside the region applying for licenses in this area. Now, I have concerns about public safety in terms of that, and that someone's driving a long way and then operating. And, I think that is an area that we need to actually look at. I'm not suggesting that, we're going to break the law in any way, but I think it is an important point to make, and it is something that we should have regard to.
Yes, point noted, and I think it should be analysed properly. Yeah.
I think what follows on for that is knowledge of the area. Should that be a condition as well? It's maybe something we need to look at, Mr. Taylor.
I think it's also the issue of civic pride as well. If someone comes into the area and wants to go somewhere, they're not going to know the postcode. Whereabouts is it? It's an important building. I want to go to such and such a museum. What streets are on? Give us a postcode. Whereas if it's someone who has wide knowledge of the area, oh yes, that's a really nice museum. You may also want to go to such and such, but I'll take you whatever. That's knowledge and sat nav are not actually in parallel. Just because you've got a sat nav doesn't mean that you have sufficient knowledge of the area to provide the service of a private hire or a taxi driver.
Could I add another point to that, Chair?
Aye, certainly, councillor.
On occasion, well, we're talking about different areas, but on occasion we've had people coming from abroad in front of us. Now, normally we would have the police looking at their records. Some of these people have came where we don't know their records, so we don't have the opportunity to put an objection in because there's no knowledge of whether they've been offenders or not. And I know there's a lot of people don't like saying anything negative about people coming abroad, and they're always welcomed in Kirkconnell. But as a point, we don't have that information and whether they've been offenders in the past or not. So the police don't have an opportunity to put an objection in.
I think that is an issue which is being developed through Police Scotland. Yeah.
Chief Inspector, would you like to comment on that, please? Okay, Councillor Syme. Anybody else want to comment? Councillor Bell?
I think it's more or less been covered by the members there, but dress code for drivers. One thing in the past it's maybe fueled a lot of arguments at taxi ranks in the past is maybe a driver might be wearing a Celtic top or a Rangers top, and sometimes that can actually cause trouble. And I think, you know, a dress code has to be set, a proper dress code. And I think, you know, when a driver is wearing a football top, whatever football team the person might not support, it does cause trouble. And I think the dress code, if a simple dress code was there, like maybe a mandatory dress code that a driver should wear, it will stop these kind of arguments if people get into taxis. In regard to training the drivers, the last taxis that have taken me home recently, I've used sat nav. And sometimes it doesn't take me the right place, but local knowledge is very, very important. If I phone for a taxi and say my postcode DG2OSE, 9 times out of 10 it'll come to door, and sat nav might take it down to the farm, which is about 500 or 600 yards away. I think the local knowledge is very important because the last time I've had drivers and they hadn't had local knowledge of the area, and it's quite important we get these combinations right.
Well, just to add to that there is the other problem now, I think, with language. You know, it's quite difficult sometimes if we have, I don't know, Polish or I don't know, any foreigners that come over here that want to do a taxi job. They need to know where they are. They need to know how to get to places, but they need to understand the passengers. I think there should be some form of, when they apply for the license, I don't know, you know, or is it part of the training? How do we do the training for drivers? I mean, where does that happen?
There is no training at the moment for drivers, and that is one of the issues which has been flagged up. And on page 9, under skills, communication and language is included there, as are childcare issues which Councillor Syme brought up. These are suggestions which have been made known previously. And in fact, I think they form part of the submission to the Scottish Government.
Councillor Geddes?
Chair, as far as I'm concerned, you know, 3.4, section 3.4 of the papers is a very good initial stab at what we should be seeking to achieve. No doubt, perhaps as we develop our consideration and we'll work our way through this, there might be other issues come to mind. But I personally think that that's a very good starting off point, because, you know, I've heard other colleagues, you know, commenting already on the various aspects of issues which are included there. And to me, we should use that at the very least as a foundation, and we should, if we need to, build upon it by all means. But if we don't, I would be quite content, you know, ultimately if we come out at the end of the process and saying, no, we feel that covers everything, because as far as I'm concerned at this moment in time, it would appear to do so, sir.
I think just above that, 3.3.5.1 is talking about disability, and drivers need to be able to recognise what different disabilities, what support they require at that specific time. And I think it's important that these sorts of things are introduced. And if drivers don't want to go through these training courses, if you like, then I think that's another issue that we need to address as a licensing board. Councillor Gilroy.
I'm just looking at page 9 under 3.4 for the drivers. And you know, it says there in the middle, you know, recommended maximum driving hours, day, week. How do we do that? If, for instance, private hire have a regular other job, and then they drive in the evenings or busy times or whatever, but they may have done a full day's work somewhere else, and they're then driving at night. How do we regulate that? Because, I mean, I think that's quite important. You know, if you think of all the tachographs that go on for lorry drivers and all the rest of it, that, I mean, it's just as important.
And again, that's one of the purposes of the review, is to look into things like that, the practicalities of it, before making a recommendation. As Councillor Gilroy says, there's no point in making a recommendation which is unenforceable, unworkable, or unreasonable.
We had an applicant recently who was going to travel up down about Manchester somewhere, drive for 12 hours and then drive home again. And really, it's a nonsense. It's not so bad when they admit that, but when they don't tell you they're going to do that, it's a problem. Anybody else want to comment? Chief Inspector, are you quite happy with discussion? Anything you want? Okay. Mr. Taylor, you want to sum up, please?
Yeah, well, I would suggest that you've got the appendix to the report there. It's a draft action plan, and it's recommended for adoption, but not, as stated previously, not set down in stone, but as a working document. And as you go through the review process, you update it and amend it. I would also suggest that you will wish to set out some sort of meeting timetable. Do you wish to meet every month? And then what do you want produced for your next ensuing meeting? It is suggested within the paper about setting up the expert reference group, and Councillor Hislop is pointed out that maybe this doesn't cover every sort of eventuality or every group, and we would take advice from the policy officer on that, on equality, just to make sure that we cover that. There are issues raised within the report which might be acted upon fairly quickly, and that's to do with recognition by the wider council of the importance of taxing private hire. In fact, the issues raised at paragraph 3.3.3, and perhaps we could consult upon and produce a draft report for the next ensuing meeting of the panel. In addition, raised issues that you want to have investigated by that time. But as I say, when you look at what the Law Commission did as part of their consultation, it was over a substantial period. There were different media used, or different ways of research and used, and perhaps that's something that you'll want to discuss at your next ensuing meeting as well, especially in relation to things like training and disabilities and equalities.
Perhaps another thing we could look at is the taxi card scheme that the council provides, or companies are supposed to provide. Again, I've had complaints over a period which has been brought up that there are vehicles turning up with taxi card machines that don't work. You know, or we have to charge you full fare, and then they find out that if they go to another company, the fare for that from that company is cheaper than what they would get if they were using the taxi cards with some of these companies. So, I mean, I think that's something that we should look at as well, the provision of these taxi cards. The machines, I believe, is their responsibility, but they're saying, oh, no, it costs us X amount of money to replace them, which I don't believe is the case. I think they can be replaced.
Can we possibly raise these allegations with the head of integrated transport with the Planning and Environment Services?
Yeah,
I think it would be.
It's been done.
It's within his remit.
Anything else to add? What's your views on future meetings? Do you want monthly meetings, bi-monthly, or do you vary them? We go for monthly. Councillor Geddes?
If we have the staff resource to support it, I would certainly be suggesting that we do go for a monthly cycle of meetings, because we've really got to get pushed on with this. There's a heck of a lot of work here, a lot of it challenging, a lot of it onerous as well. So don't let's underestimate the magnitude of our task. But you know, we've got to start somewhere, and let's try to get it pushed on as best we can. And to that extent, as I've said, monthly meeting cycle, provided we've got the staffing resources, both in-house and looking at these two gentlemen on my right here, you know, sort of, I presume that they would have a key role to play as well. And I would also suggest, sir, we try to get the appropriate trade representatives involved in this process as soon as we possibly can, you know, to work along with us.
Right. It may be appropriate at some meetings to have representatives from there along to our meetings. So monthly meetings, we'll leave it to Mr. Taylor to arrange dates and let us have a list of them.
Chair, monthly meetings with the proviso, there's something to do. There's no point in meeting for the sake of meeting.
I would certainly agree with that, Councillor Foster.
Yes, Chair. If it turns out that there is a resource issue, I can say to Councillor Foster, we'll absolutely keep members informed. There's no point, as you say, in having half a report or have a meeting just to note something. That's not what we're here for. No, any meeting would be a substantive meeting. But let's go forward, at least initially, on a monthly meeting and get this review kicked off.
that was bound to come. Councillor Syme. Councillor Syme.
I don't know if it would be pertinent or not, Chair, but I don't know if it would be worthwhile maybe try to tie them in with panels anyway, because a lot of the members will already be here. I don't know how feasible that would be. But I mean, I come down for this morning, and then I'm going back up the road. Sometimes I come down for a panel for half an hour, and then I'm going. If I was in that group, I'd be quite happy just staying on at the same time when I'm travelling anyway. And you will have a lot of members in the group here for the panel anyway. I don't know if that's pertinent or not.
We could maybe leave that with Mr. Taylor to arrange dates, and if he can link them, so much the better.
Yeah, we'll speak to governance about that and see if it can be linked in as much as possible. Yeah. That often that it turns out not to be practicable. And what we don't want is to arrange, get all the papers out, and then it's attached to a meeting which overruns. And you're either rushing through it or you're having to postpone everything. But certainly the draft action plan, could that be approved as a working document?
I think any issues that were raised that's not on the action plan you'll add in as well. Okay, agreed to that. Thank you very much.
In the first meeting, we'll update on expert reference group, and also in respect of the issues of paragraph 3.3.3, see if we can move them forward. As a preliminary, the question of recommending to the wider authority the importance of the taxi and private hire trade, and also make recommendations in respect to communications with the trade. But as Councillor Geddes has hinted, perhaps that's something the trade will want input on as well.
I think a group of youngsters has been mentioned for a membership of the reference group. I think the Disability Access Panel should be in there as well, Mr Taylor.
But I think that has actually been updated through communications, Chair. And that's why it talks of diversity working group. I think that's an update.
There's diversity and they're disabled as well. We'll leave it in your capable hands.
Right.
I have no other business. Anybody, any issues to raise? All right, thank you all very much for attending, and we'll see you in due course.